A couple of years ago, I posed the question, are Sony Trinitrons necessary anymore? And that was a catch-all term for CRTs like Kleenex or Band-Aids, but in that video, I concluded that they were the best way to enjoy a 4:3 aspect ratio gaming, and if you wanted to play a light gun game, you absolutely needed a CRT TV. In that video, people suggested that if I really wanted to experience retro games the way that they were meant to be played, I needed a PVM. So I went out and bought one. A 1988 Sony Trinitron PVM 1342Q superfine pitch monitor to be exact. I paid $145 for it on eBay and picked it up locally. I've had this thing for almost a year now, so I feel comfortable letting you know my experience, so hopefully if you were curious about buying a PVM, this video will help you make that choice. If you already have a PVM and are looking to confirm your decision, fair warning, I am a casual when it comes to this kind of stuff, and while I did do my research, I can tell you that if you had an issue with my Trinitron video, you might have some words for me on this video, but hey, you might agree with me though. Be sure to let me know in those comments down below, and subscribe if you're new. With that out of the way, let's get started. A PVM is a professional video monitor, and while a lot of companies made them, the biggest manufacturers still found today are JVC and Sony. There are also broadcast video monitors or BVMs, but for the sake of clarity, I'll only focus on the PVM in this video, and most of the points in this video can be applied to BVMs as well. What sets a PVM apart from a consumer CRT, at least in North America, is that the PVM can take RGB inputs with no modification. Your consumer TV takes a composite as video or component signal and then converts it into RGB to be displayed on your screen. And that conversion process doesn't always bring the highest quality picture across, especially since your console is also converting that signal into a component as video or what have you. The PVM has no conversion on its RGB input, so you get RGB in and RGB out, which results in the cleanest picture. The other difference is that most models of PVMs have more horizontal lines than consumer CRT TVs. Mine has 600, whereas a 20-inch Trinitron that I have only has 500 or so, and that TV was made in 2005 versus my PVM, which was made in 1988. The higher line count makes text a lot easier to read, and in turn makes video games look a bit crisper as well. Some PVMs have features that CRTs don't have, such as degaussing, which can get rid of any electromagnetic interference, but it really depends on the set that you're thinking of buying. Not all PVMs are created equal, and as such, that initial learning curve can be daunting to first-time buyers, and there are a handful of hurdles involved. The biggest hurdle is the price. If you think that $150 for a 33-year-old 13-inch monitor is too expensive, then PVMs aren't for you, because I got a deal on this one. PVMs were always more expensive than CRTs. Heck, you could find CRTs on the side of the road for free. And since they're professional video monitors, only professionals had access to them. I mean, I'm sure you could have bought one as a consumer during the time, but if Sony's current PVM offerings are any indication, you probably couldn't justify the cost at the time. A 13-inch PVM in 1988 would have cost over $1,000. Given that barrier, the chances of you finding one of these PVMs in your parents' basement are slim to none. If you were aware of them in the early aughts, then you probably could have gotten one for free, as broadcasting studios and other industries were migrating to digital and liquidating their analog stock. Nowadays, PVMs are mostly in the hands of people who know what they have, and really only retro video game collectors are looking for them, so pricing reflects that enthusiast market. Depending on what PVM you're looking for, you could spend anywhere from $150 to $3,500, a pretty wide range, which leads me to the next hurdle. There's just too many options. Buying a PVM can be pretty complicated. I mean, if you've reconciled with the fact that you want to spend a lot of money on an older monitor, you're going to want to make sure that you get your money's worth. Your number one priority must be that the monitors support RGB, and you might be surprised to learn that not all PVMs have this feature. Take this monitor for example, a 19-inch PVM for $215. That's really a good deal, right? Well, it doesn't have RGB. It only has a typical composite input, which is fine, but you can already get that on a consumer TV for a fraction of the cost, and you probably already have one right now. The PVM isn't going to upscale that footage or suddenly change the color profile. And while composite does look good on my PVM versus my regular TV, it doesn't really see something that I would buy if that was the only option. So if it doesn't have RGB, don't bother. The best indicator of whether or not the PVM supports an RGB signal is looking on the back. If you can't tell by the photos online, Googling the model number and the letters RGB will usually take you to a Reddit thread answering it if they have it, and also go over some of the features. There's also a whole wiki on the CRT gaming subreddit with a list of model numbers and their specs, which I'll link down below. And honestly, RGB is really the only must-have feature of the PVM. The rest of the features just boil down to preference. I would suggest looking for one with 600 plus lines rather than the typical 450. Mine, for example, is a super fine pitch, which has 600 lines, and it's a much better picture quality, and the fact that it's only 13 inches means that the lines per inch is greater. Even if you go with one that is 450 lines, you'll still have a good picture. A lot of them still have a much sharper focus than consumer CRTs. Also, keep in mind that most monitors don't support any resolution higher than 480p. There are some that support 1080i, but you better be prepared to spend a lot of money on it. Basically, you have to come to terms that you're probably not going to play anything more modern than a PlayStation 2 or Wii without it looking like a downgrade. While I was researching, someone actually put their PS4 into 1080i mode to play The Last of Us on their monitor, but outside of the novelty, it just seems something off about playing modern games on older TVs. One other thing to note is that the newer the monitor, the better the creature comforts. Nothing wrong with the older monitors, but mine does require you to open it up to adjust certain settings, whereas the newer ones have on-screen menus, which is really convenient and safer. Plus, some of the newer models also accept component in addition to RGB, which means that your PVM can support more consoles without modification. I have a component to RGB converter that I got from RetroTink, so I'm not really worried about not having that feature. There are other features to consider, like speakers, for example. Mine has a mono speaker, but it's usable only with S-Video and composite. So for RGB consoles, I need to input the audio into external speakers or listen through headphones. Another factor to consider with the PVM is condition. Now, mine has a lot of patina around the edges, and it was actually missing the Sony badge up front. I found one that came off of a turntable and I modified it to fit. There's also a scratch or part where the film is coming up right in the dead center of the screen. It's not super obvious, but it is there and it can show up in white screen scenarios. Other PVMs have been left on for decades, so it's possible that you're going to see some significant burn-in. And these are the things that just aren't prevalent in consumer CRT TVs. People turned them off and they didn't keep them in environments where they would get too damaged. And PVMs weren't just kept in broadcast studios, they were in medical fields and industrial settings as well. Mine actually had a weird odor when it would stay on long enough, and like, it wasn't too bad, but it was pretty obvious. Now that I've had it for a while, it just doesn't appear to smell anymore though. The biggest reason people get the PVM is that it is considered the best way to enjoy retro games, but how does it compare to a standard CRT and a modern television? I wanted to compare a 13-inch TV to a 13-inch PVM, and since my wife didn't want me to add another TV, I put out an open call on Twitter, and Terry was in my area and hooked me up with an RCA 13-inch TV with component input, so thanks a lot, Terry, for lending me this television. In addition to the CRT and PVM, I also plugged the console where applicable into my 50-inch plasma with HDMI. The first console I tested was the analog NT Mini Noir, which was nice because it did have a color test that I could use. When you compare all three, the PVM does appear to have truer colors than the rest of them. I didn't really attempt to calibrate the RCA TV that I had, I just wanted to show what it would look like out of the box. The RCA is brighter, but not by much, and you can see some glowing around the text, where on the PVM it looks pretty sharp. But the real difference in quality comes from the more modern consoles like the Sega Saturn and the Nintendo GameCube. The PVM has a better dynamic range, so playing a game like Outrun on the Sega Saturn, you can see a dramatic difference in the quality versus the CRT. Now, the RCA television isn't the best that you can possibly buy, so I did compare these games with my KV FS Trinitron, which is a 20-inch TV, and the difference isn't as significant when compared to the RCA TV from before, but the PVM does eke out a better picture. While my Sony CRT is brighter, the colors on the PVM look a little bit more true to life when you compare them side by side. If you were to view each of them individually like I have for a long time, I don't really think each one dramatically changes the game or looks especially good when you're playing them on your couch. It really boils down to preference. So, should you drop your hard-earned money on a PVM for the ultimate retro gaming experience? In this current landscape, it's really hard to justify the cost for the minimal amount of difference that a PVM can offer. I only paid $145 for mine, and all things considered, I enjoy it a lot and I plan on keeping it for a while. It's nice to have on my desk, and it gets a lot of attention when I show off my collection. But when you consider that the PVM requires your console to be able to output RGB, then it starts to show its limitations when they're going for so much. If you live in the United States like I do, there aren't a lot of consoles that output RGB natively without modifications, and plus you do have to buy specific cables to take advantage of that RGB. To name a few, the first Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis 1 and 2 models output natively, but the Nintendo 64 requires modification despite sharing the same AV plug as the Super Nintendo. If you have an older console like the Atari 2600 and Intellivision, you're out of luck also because most PVMs don't have RF inputs either. Of course, if you are into modding your consoles to get the best picture, then the PVM is just the next logical step, so I definitely recommend getting one. But if you are a filthy casual like I am and don't have the technical resilience to mod your consoles correctly, I mean, I'm currently trying to mod my Intellivision and it's not going well, then you are still in luck because of these HD Retrovision cables, and these really close the gap between the consumer CRT and the PVM. Now, HD Retrovision cables still require a console to support RGB, but they convert that RGB to a component signal, which is what most modern CRTs have. And what you get in return is a crisp signal from your console on your TV without having to buy a dedicated set. And while the HD Retrovision cables are expensive, they're $65 for one cable, and they also sell adapters for $17 that can expand capability. When you compare them to the cost of a PVM monitor currently, the value proposition more than makes up for the quality that the PVM can offer. And in the comparison portion of this video, I was actually using the HD Retrovision cables for the Sega Saturn, and I split them to my PVM and the CRT, which is probably why the quality looks so close. If these cables didn't exist, I would suggest looking into a PVM, but quite honestly, a good modern CRT TV like the Sony KV-FS series will rival a PVM, especially when you consider the cost proposition. The Sony KV-FS series has everything you need for retro gaming also. You can use light guns, it has RF composite component and S-video, and they're available in sizes larger than 20 inches. I personally prefer smaller televisions because of their maneuverability and footprint, but if you want something larger, then you can get it for substantially less than a PVM of a similar size. There was a person nearby selling two 32-inch Sony Wega televisions for $10, not each, total. Retro gaming has evolved into a community of people with varying degrees of quality thresholds. If you were to compare this to the music scene, HD TVs would be Spotify, CRTs would be turntables, and PVMs would be reel-to-reel. And this video wasn't really to bash PVMs. I mean, there's nothing wrong with buying a PVM, especially if the thrill of hunting for the best possible picture and gaming experience is appealing to you. Getting into the PVM scene unlocks a whole new echelon of collecting. There are people with a wide variety of PVMs because there are nuances to each one. Plus, you do have the added street cred bonus. When I post pictures of my collection online, a lot of people point out the PVM along with the other collecting staples like a Panasonic Q, Rob the Robot, and Nintendo Cereal Box. So if you want to be accepted among the retro gaming elite, then you really need a PVM. But if you're just a casual like I am, just get a Trinitron, or better yet, game on the existing TV that you already have. There's no wrong way to game. It all boils down to your personal preference. If you like this video, please give it a like and share it with those who might find it interesting. And if you're new here, consider subscribing for future content. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter @SnickTendo. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Super Nintendo, and I'll see you next time.